Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlekauff to get notified when I go live. What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out podcast. Subscribe wherever you may listen. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hammer that like button. Subscribe to the page and even leave a comment down below. As you can see, I'm rocking the 3 and Out trucker hat. Yesterday, I rocked the 3 and Out flex fit hat. If you want to get some merch, of course you do. Go to thevolume.com. Search the merch. Search our show. And hammer one of these hats. Hell, get a couple. I just ordered a bunch for my friends and family yesterday. The flex fits fit great. If you like these trucker hats, they fit great. Can't recommend them enough. Thevolume.com. Go check out the merch. A lot of football news going on. We will dive into it all, from Brock Purdy and Nick Bosa to Saquon Barkley. He signs a contract. To some of the other news and notes around the National Football League. But first, do you have a smartphone? Because if you do you know what I need you to do? I need you to go to your app store, and I need you to download the Gametime app. They happen to be the official ticketing app of this podcast. They've sent me to concerts. They've sent me to hockey games. They've sent me to spring training games. They've sent me everywhere. And they've sent a lot of you there too, because when you download the Gametime app, first-time ticket users signing up and using the promo code JOHN, that's just my name, JOHN, get $20 off any pair of tickets. If you haven't used it yet and you want to go watch your favorite NFL team this fall, you want to watch your favorite college football team this fall, use it. Gametime has access to everything from games to comedy shows to concerts. They will take care of you. Promo code JOHN. Download it right now. Fastest growing ticketing app in America. Do it. Do it right now. Let's start with the 49ers, who had veterans report today, and tomorrow, unofficially, because the pads don't come on until Sunday, starts their training camp and their practice with everybody. And Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch spoke today. And there are several news and notes coming out of the organization. But to me, the big news was that Brock Purdy, who in the spring and really early wintertime avoided Tommy John when Kyle had a terrible play call and had his backup tight end blocking all-pro, and led to Purdy's elbow getting injured. And it looked kind of dire there for a little bit. Is this guy going to have Tommy John? Is this guy going to miss the season? And when he had the surgery here in Arizona by a baseball doctor, they were pretty optimistic, but you never knew until 3 or 3.5 months in and he could start throwing. And as you've seen all over the NFL, guys going on PUP, and we'll get into that a little bit later, Brock Purdy avoided PUP. And he's not quote-unquote full go, but he's able to practice. They're going to put him on somewhat of a timeline on a given week, a couple days on, 1 day off, and let that backup quarterback battle between Trey Lance and Sam Darnold take shape. But to me, the big story is this. Before Andy Reid got Patrick Mahomes, who's going to go down as, I don't know, top 3 quarterback ever, he sure's on that trajectory, and just one of the great players we've ever seen, he was winning a lot. Now, he hadn't won a Super Bowl, but he was winning constantly. And what made it so awesome is that he was doing it with all sorts of quarterbacks, from Donovan McNabb to when he had to win with Jeff Garcia to Michael Vick to Alex Smith to obviously now Patrick Mahomes. And what makes Coach Reid such an awesome coach is he doesn't need Brett Favre or Patrick Mahomes to win games. Now, you need typically a great quarterback to win a Super Bowl. There have been some outlier teams and individuals, a Trent Dilfer, a Brad Johnson. But for the most part, you need a star quarterback, a Peyton Manning, a Tom Brady, a Mahomes to win Super Bowls. But you don't need them to consistently win double-digit games and go to the playoffs. Now, only the great coaches can figure it out with all sorts of different quarterbacks. And Kyle Shanahan is really going to test the limits this year, because Jimmy Garoppolo, who to me is pretty average and greatly benefited from a fantastic defense, awesome weapons, and most importantly, a fantastic play caller, is Brock Purdy was better last year. Now, it's a very, very small sample size, the 7 games, but the 49ers offense was dramatically better. He's more athletic than Jimmy Garoppolo. And I don't know if he has a stronger arm, but he's definitely more willing and more accurate down the field to push the ball. And I would call him more of a playmaker than Jimmy Garoppolo. But if Kyle Shanahan rolls into this season and wins 11, 12 Chiefs or the Bengals or the Bills, because if I'm picking a team, I'm just going to lean with the star quarterback, even though the 49ers roster, top to bottom, or the Eagles is as good or better than them all. Like, really, the only team in the league that can go player for player with the 49ers is the Eagles. Now, they happen to have a very expensive premium quarterback who went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and really outplayed him in the Super Bowl. Could Brock Purdy do that? I don't know. But if Kyle Shanahan, which everyone, including my mom, is going to pick the 49ers to win the division, as you should, but if you can just consistently win with random quarterbacks, that's a pretty incredible accomplishment. And the debate with Kyle Shanahan for a long time is his record was to get him in the playoffs, and he wins playoff games. Has not won a Super Bowl, but the 3 of the years that he's been in the NFC Championship games, he's won 2 games each year. That's why he has 6 playoff wins. Like 6, he's beat Mike McCarthy back-to-back years, at home and on the road. I mean, he beat Aaron Rodgers on the road, right? His teams come to play. And a lot like Andy Reid is the one thing in defensive lines, and it just has a very good feel for playmakers. And to have a good feel for playmakers doesn't mean you always got to be drafting guys in the first round. He has the ability to see guys in the draft and then develop them once they're on the team to have a very explosive team, regardless who the quarterback is. It's why you can win games when Alex Smith is not even throwing a touchdown to a wide receiver, because he's throwing the ball to Jamal Charles all the time. Your tight ends are productive. Your defense is good because it doesn't feel like they understand the offensive side of the ball. And I'm not saying Kyle Shanahan or positions on that side of the ball. They want pass rushers. They want big heavies in the middle of their defensive line. They love good cornerbacks. They want to be able to cover. And that's where you put yourself in position, because all you can ask for is home games in the playoffs, a tier of 5 or 6 teams, right? We know the 3 teams in the AFC. It's the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Bills. All 3 basically have $50 million quarterbacks, right? I know, $50 million quarterbacks. All 3 of them should be the highest paid guys in the league. And then you look at the NFC, which is a lot weaker, the high level of play and be a Pro Bowler, a very, very expensive elite quarterback. And then Dak Prescott, who, little underwhelming, but is a consistent Pro Bowl level guy. And then the 49ers, who have Mr. Irrelevant coming off an elbow injury. And if he's just able to win like this, it's a remarkable job of team building, right? Because their team is so well balanced. They made a move that I red flagged last year. When they traded for Christian McCaffrey, I'm like, you're trading a second, a third, and a fourth for a running back who's been injured a lot? And then they get Christian McCaffrey, and he scores 14 fucking touchdowns as a 49er. And he's just a complete badass. I mean, he does it all. Like, Saquon's like, pay me. It's like, hey, Saquon, be better in the passing game. You know why McCaffrey's way better player than you when you're both healthy? Because he dominates in the passing game. If you want to get paid, try doing that if any of your running backs. It's a passing league. We know you guys can run the ball. To run block and pass block. What makes a good linebacker? Can you play the run and play the pass? Like, you kind of got to do it all, right? The reason these quarterbacks get paid so much money is there is nothing they can't do. That's why we pick apart some of the mid-tier guys, because they're lacking some stuff. So big year for Kyle Shanahan, who I really think is kind of becoming, until he wins a Super Bowl. And remember, it took Andy multiple decades to win a Super Bowl. It's an incredible accomplishment. A couple other things coming out of 49er camp today. Nick Bosa's holding out. One thing I would say, they're best players. I've been around them professionally now for 12, 15 years, right? A little less than that, probably about 12 years, I guess. And they will pay everybody from Frank Gore to Patrick Willis to Vernon Davis to Kaepernick to Joe Staley to this crew of guys. Fred Warner, Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel. They'll argue, they'll negotiate. They just took over a team in Europe who was in the EPL and then got relegated. Well, their main cap guy, Parag, who I would say him and Howie just give you an open checkbook and say, you write down the number and we'll give you what you want. Here's what I know, and I've talked to them about it. They know Nick Bosa is going to cost a shitload. $110, $120 million guaranteed. Money you could combine every running back. There ain't a GM in the league that would pay anyone a quarter of what you would pay Nick Bosa for 3 or 4 years, ever since Bosa's been on the team. He doesn't practice that much in training camp. Unlike a lot of players where you're like, is he really in good shape? He needs training camp to get dialed in. Nick Bosa goes to Florida for 6 months with his brother, their dad who played in the NFL. And I came back last year as jacked as any player I've seen in the NFL since like Khalil Mack in his prime. So I'm not worried if I'm the 49ers about Bosa's conditioning level, about his ability to be ready to go. I don't blame Nick Bosa. Until I have a contract, I'm not stepping on the field. I understand the new rules about the fines, right? Left tackles and the pass rushers. Those are the most important guys in the league. And then a couple right tackles like Lane Johnson that are also valued at that level. But Bosa's holding out, which is, to me, totally understandable. Sort of injury in camp. The other thing is last year, Deebo's had a weird career, right? Within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. We know he can play running back, runs a lot of slants, runs a lot of quick wide receiver screens, get the ball in his hand, and then let him take off. I don't know what his 40 time is. All I know is catching him, and they typically do not. But early on in his career, he had battled some injuries and some weight issues. Because unlike DK and AJ, and sometimes like the weight can be an issue. And a couple years ago, came into camp out of shape. And then in 2021, literally carried the franchise to the playoffs. Contract year gets broken off. 2022 wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. You'd still want, like, Deebo Samuel type guy you want on your squad, big game. You want to be in the trenches with him. Whether you're gambling on him, whether you're rooting for his team, dude's a war daddy. And his holdout thing, unlike Nick Bosa, don't worry about his conditioning. Deebo, 2 years ago, went to Florida, and people weren't quite sure what he was doing. This year, I don't know this for a fact, but if I had to take an educated guess, he spent his entire offseason in Scottsdale. I think the 49ers went, hey, you go to this person. There's a big training facility here where a ton of NFL guys work out. And Kyle Shanahan said today he was sending him pictures constantly. He's like, I've never had a man send me so many pictures of his shirt off. I think Deebo's very proud. I think he's very locked in. I think he's a really good player, would play for every team, start for every team. But he's also a unique player. Not every OC could use him. But if you're on the second tier of wide receivers, let's use T. Higgins as an example, you better believe the younger guys like Ayuk's and the Higgins are thinking, 19, 20, $21 million. So it's very, very hard to build the team, even if you have a cheap quarterback, with one wide receiver making 25 and another guy making 20. I don't care how you fudge the books, and the 49ers are good at that. So this is a big year for Deebo just to kind of reflex his muscles for the 49ers to feel good about him being a franchise-level player. Honestly, I'm a little tired of the whole running back thing. I really am. I think it's kind of embarrassing. All these guys bitching and moaning are all making $10, $11, $12 million, right? If they were making $2 million, I would understand. But they act like they're more deserving of everyone getting their back, like they're royally getting screwed, than linebackers, than tight ends, than guards and centers. Why are they any different? This notion, everyone was saying that they should get a special spot in the salary cap. Why shouldn't guards and centers? Why shouldn't linebackers? Why shouldn't tight ends? Running backs are the last position that any GM or coach would want to utilize for the benefit of the team. They are the most replaceable player. Austin Eckler, who got the Zoom together as the group, right, literally is a great example of an undrafted free agent who KO'd, beat out, and sent packing a former first-round pick in Melvin Gordon. Said, I'm better than you. I'm an undrafted free agent. Get the bleep out of here. That's essentially what he does. Did actually should have signed the contract when I'm sure they offered him $25, $30 million guaranteed. Because now he's going to get franchise tagged more than likely again next year if he has a solid season. So he will have two basic economics. This is not fantasy football. This is not Madden. This is a business, right? Big time money. Because they're very hard to replace. If you lose Trent Williams, if you lose Lane Johnson, you're not finding their replacement. They don't exist. Walk around society. See how many 6'5", 300-plus pounders with running back feet you're going to find on this planet. I'll find a ton of guys, 5'11", big-time athletes that are strong. Right? You just will. And there aren't many guys that can throw for 5,000 yards. That's why quarterbacks make so much money. Right? If there were less running backs, if Saquon Barkley wasn't a dime a dozen, and I know he's better than most, but the difference of him and some random running back right now at a camp that's going to become the next Isaiah Pacheco isn't very wide. And do you know what the Chiefs are paying Isaiah Pacheco? The league minimum, 3 other players. And then I'll just have a better team. Why? It's a team game. This isn't golf. I'm not just trying to find Rory or Brooks Koepka. This isn't tennis. This is a team game. And there are several positions, pass rusher, tackle, quarterback, that are infinitely more valuable by a wide gap than running back, which is arguably at the bottom of the list. But this notion that they're getting screwed any more than tight ends, isn't Travis Kelce making $12, $13 million a year? What does Travis Kelce have in common with Nick Chubb or Saquon Barkley or Austin Eckler? Not much. Been doing it a lot longer at the highest level in the biggest games. I don't hear him bitching and moaning. So this notion of these Zoom calls, of they're getting screwed. So it's never going to change. They constantly like scream at the fans and the media, like your coach and your GM view you as widgets. They just do. They're the people who don't value you, the decision makers, right? It's them. They are the people, and they're the most important people in your building because they choose who to pay. Us people that talk about it for a living, your fan base, they have zero pull. Absolutely none. Now, obviously there is a variable with the Giants with Daniel Jones, but like we said earlier, he plays the most important position. So is he overpaid? Of course he is. Was he way harder to pull up front and just show up and ball? And the next year he'll probably get franchised again. I give the Giants credit for not capitulating. Hurry, like that's just, is it worth a little more than you would have liked to pay? Of course. But as we see all around the league, like the Vikings are going to find this out. Cole's cash, Vikings next year. Cousins got some flaws, but good luck upgrading that. You saw, depending on who your favorite team is, the PUP list all over the NFL. And you saw guys like Jonathan Taylor, Von Miller, Teron Armstead, and a ton of guys are on the list. It's why it was a big story when Brock Purdy avoided it. And, every team every year goes, we feel good, he should be back soon. And sometimes they will. I saw a headline, Jonathan Taylor might only be on it a couple days. List. I'm just nervous. I'm not saying it's the end all be all. I'm not saying he's never going to play all season, but we see it time and time again that those guys never actually come back. And what's going to happen this season? He's going to be injured. So I'm not even counting that one. But Von Miller, for example, major injury last year. Now he's a veteran player, and I'm sure you're taking it easy, but until he's not going to play this season, doesn't mean that he's not going to be good. But until guys start practicing, especially, this is not 1958 Bear Bryant double days. Practices for NFL standards, historically, pretty easy. There's no tackling to the ground. It is one practice a day, and honestly, there's just 3 practices in a row, and then there's an off day that's mandatory by the league. So let's just something to keep an eye on the PUP list. And then there are good times like J.C. Horn, former high pick, missed all of OTAs because he had an injury, avoids it, and he's ready to go for training camp. Like to me, anytime a guy was injured in OTAs is able to avoid PUP and come back ready to roll, it's great. And then clearly, we talked about it yesterday, you have those instances of guys getting hurt. You just kind of hope it's not that big a deal. Jameson Williams, who it doesn't necessarily matter because he's going to miss those games for gambling, tweak something. Is going to miss a couple of days. And then you have Tony with the Chiefs, who tweaks a knee, return the punt, all of a sudden needs surgery. And then all of a sudden, we don't feel he's quite ready for week 1. So it's what makes this sport so difficult, and it's why depth is important. And it gets back to the running back thing. When you overpay certain positions, they better produce at the highest level, because if the news and notes, like I said, Zach Martin, this running back thing, like what about a guy like this? Future Hall of Famer, one of the best players in the league. Just if you put it in a vacuum, obviously guard is on the lower end of the tiers of importance, because the way you have to look at a football team is there is just a hierarchy of importance. Starting with quarterback, you could argue left tackle, or just tackle in general. I want my right tackle to be good too. And so many sweet pass rushers now line up over the right. Howard Mudd used to always tell me, why do you keep saying left tackle, right tackle? What's the difference? He's like, when I was with the Colts, we had Dwight Freeney on one end and Robert Mathis on the other. So your left tackle is good and your right tackle stinks. Good luck. You're going to get your quarterback killed. So tackles, pass rushers, quarterbacks. And then I think we can argue. A lot of people say corners. I'd argue D tackle, because if I have a sweet defensive end, sweet D tackle, sweet defensive line, I can kind of get by. The 49ers made the conference championship a couple years ago with Josh Norman, who's slower than me and you. Why? Because their pass rush was dominant. Now, does it help to have good corners? Of course. Do you want lockdown guys? Yes. Would I love to have Deion Sanders and Darrelle Revis in their prime? Of course. But for the most part, it's trade a lot for them, i.e. what the Rams did to get Jalen Ramsey. And there aren't really, I'd argue there's a short list of quote-unquote elite corners. And depending on what your defense is, you might not play a lot of man-to-man defense. It might be more of a zone defense. And then you need a specific type player like a Richard Sherman. And the only reason the 49ers were able to get him the 1 year is because he was coming off a torn Achilles, right? Otherwise, Seattle wouldn't have got rid of him. So once you get an elite corner, they don't really become available. So Zach Martin, I think the Cowboys don't have a choice, partly because if you're Zach Martin and you go, however long I've been here, right, a decade, kicking picks, good player. And they gave $97 million. I don't have the guaranteed money, but I'd guess 40, 50 million. They gave a lot of cash. And the average per year, which I think could be a little overrated, but when a guy like this, who they clearly like, ain't going anywhere for a while, averages close to $24 million a season. If you are, or excuse me, $20 million a season, might be like 19.5. If you're Martin, you're like, I don't need $20 million, but I'd like about 15 to 18. We got to do something with this contract. I ain't showing up till we figure this thing out. So they got a little bit of a problem on their hands. You got to take care of what's in front of you, but this problem I don't think is going to go away. Justin Fields, I'll give him credit on this one because I've been critical of just his comment about 4,000 yards. Like, bro, just walk before you run, right? Just let's just have a little success before you start making proclamations about what's going to happen. I renewed, and they're going to do it again this season, and they're trying to find quarterbacks. And one of the first quarterbacks they went to, smart move, right? Get a young guy, kind of polarizing, in Justin Fields. He turned him down. And who knows? Maybe he could have a breakout season, and that would be an awesome storyline, or it could go the other way. In general, when you're in his position and you might not be on the team next year, I think the move is just 100% focus on yourself, nothing external that you can control. Anything that you can control, avoid it. And I think he made the right decision on this. Like, to me, a guy like one reason it was smart for Mahomes to do it. How often do you get the opportunity to document something like that in the middle of a Hall of Fame career? Like, to me, Joe Burrow should be all over that, right? But I do think it's going to be harder to find the Mariota type. I mean, are you going to get like, I don't even know, a Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, that type guy? But Zach Wilson, the Jets would never even allow him to do that. But how do you find, really who are the cousins, right? Dak Prescott, Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy would never do it. Hard time seeing Dak do it. Might be a little more difficult getting guys to do it than you'd think. Now that I hadn't really thought much about it, but what's the upside if things go sideways? And if you have a down year, people will blame you for doing it. Because ultimately, Mahomes won the Super Bowl and the MVP. Cousins had a fantastic year. They hosted a playoff game. Mariota's career unraveled, but no one really cares. Like, he was a backup before that. I do wonder if it's going to be a little more difficult for them getting some starters, though I don't think it's crazy for the Burrows, even the Josh Allens, Jalen Hurts, another guy. But it'll be fascinating to see what three quarterbacks end up giving the go-ahead. Chris Jones, like Zach Martin, it gets complicated because once you have an older player who's going on contract 3 or 4, they start going, I'm underpaid, because in a vacuum they are, right? And Chris Jones, going in the last year of his deal, makes almost $20 million, goes, well, last year I was every bit as good as Aaron Donald. We won the Super Bowl. I'm the best defensive player on our team, which is the best team in the league. Am I not a $28, $30 million player? Now, I do think they would gladly just give him like a 1 year, $30 million deal, but that's not really probably what he's looking for, right? He's looking for like 3 years, $90 million, probably guaranteeing 65, 70 million. That's if he's willing to go short. I would imagine he'd want like 150, guarantee 80. And I do think it gets pretty difficult. The problem for Veach and the Chiefs is you need them, because you're in win now, try to go back-to-back, win another Super Bowl, just be a legendary dynasty type team. He gives you the best opportunity to do that. But big picture value wise, like, is he more likely to only have one more year like that or four? I think if you were a betting man, you'd probably say less likely to have like 5-6 more elite years, right? And could you flip him right now for maybe a 1 and a 2 and get some other team that would be willing to pay him? You could, I think. But is that the smart move when you're trying to win now? It's not. It's kind of in a weird spot. And it's probably why they haven't figured out a number, because it becomes difficult. I also think it's difficult for your locker room when you go, everyone knows Mahomes, how important he is. But let's say we wouldn't pay Tyreek last year, so we traded him. Kelsey, who is going to go down as the greatest tight end in the history of the league, is, if I pay you $29-30 million, he's making less than half of what you're making. How do I look him in the face and say, this is cool? You know, it becomes a very slippery slope. And this is something that Belichick always thought about, was the dynamics of his locker room when it comes to the money, because we're all humans. I don't care what you do. You could work in an insurance company. You can work in any industry. The difference is, a lot of times in our different businesses, I've only worked in football and in radio, and you kind of know who makes what. I would imagine there are some businesses where you don't really know, but I think it's natural for humans to talk. Football, you don't even need to, it's a public number. So you know exactly how much people make. Well, if you're listening to this right now and you're very, very valuable to your company, let's just pick a number. You're making $200,000 and you go, God, I'm making a ton of money. I have a good life. They kind of let me do my thing. It's a win-win for everybody. I probably could make maybe 300 if I went somewhere else, but it's pretty risky. I get sweet bonuses. It's working out pretty well. But then there's another guy who's your equal, who gets a contract that's worth $450,000. It would just create animosity. I don't care if his job's a little more important than you, if his job's a little harder to find. We're human beings. We just are. And that money, especially for us guys, is kind of how we value our self-worth. Right or wrong, it is what it is. That's just a fact for a lot of us. The longer you work in a business, if that's the way you think, it only gets worse, right? So I think that's an issue that the Chiefs and Veach, I don't have any inside information on this, but let's just put the pieces of the puzzle together. That if Mahomes is the most important, 1B and 1C are Chris Jones and Travis Kelce. Well, you can't have one guy, even if his position is more valuable and he's already making more. A little weird. 2.5 times. Like, I wouldn't blame Travis for like going, what the hell? And then last but not least, I guess I was going to say his fiance. They're married now. Veronica, good follow on Instagram, is pregnant. And the baby is due, sometime give or take mid-late October. And obviously you can't always control when the baby comes. And it could come on a weekend when they are playing a game. And I can see this coming from a mile away. I would assume Sean would be with the baby, but I do think there's a percentage chance that he would coach a game while his wife's in labor, especially if it's in LA, and then get coming out of the fucking woodwork by the media elites and their takes on life balance and some things. And listen, I'm not saying right or wrong, and who knows, maybe the baby happens on Tuesday and it doesn't even matter. But if this thing's happening, especially on a road game, it'll be a fascinating follow. And if he were to coach the game, and I'm not saying you should do this, I don't have a child yet. I would. In the football, you never know. You talk about a controversy you can see coming from a mile away. Does Sean McVay coach if his wife goes into labor? Adios.